I presume if you've been attracted to a talk called Screw the Fairytale, then perhaps you've all got your own version of what the fairy tale is. Maybe you've followed the fairy tale and it hasn't worked, or maybe you're still looking for the fairy tale, or maybe like me, you haven't ever really fancied following the fairy tale. So just to summarise what my book is about, it's an exploration of modern models of relationships as alternatives to the conventional marriage and kids and big house and a dog and all that. So I look at various different models such as open relationships, married couples that live apart, women who've decided to stay single and have sperm donor babies, submissive dominant relationships, etc., etc. So people always say to me, you know, why did you want to write a book called Screw the Fairy Tale? And I think they presume that I must be bitter, I must be spurned, I must hate men, I must be anti-relationship. And I assure you that that's definitely not the case. In fact, I'd probably say the complete opposite is true. I'm a huge romantic, love dating, love men. In fact, probably a bit of a romance addict, actually. And probably the reason why I've never wanted to settle for that serious relationship is I've never really fancied the idea of full-time boyfriend, meet all their friends, learn all their friends' names, give up your Sundays, cook, who wants to do that? Why I wanted to write this book was because people always say to me, you know, when I say that I don't want that sort of conventional model, they generally say this sort of thing. The predominant thing is you'll grow old with cats. Now, I don't know what sort of cats they live with or they come across, maybe a scary one like that, but the cats I come across are perfectly friendly. I don't see anything wrong with growing old with cats. And if you read some of the phrases here, these are things that have actually been said to me or said to the people that I've interviewed for my book. So they say, well, you must want to eventually, you know, or you just haven't met the right person yet. And the two which I think are the most interesting are, they say, on the one hand, they say, isn't that a bit selfish? And I think, well, why? Because I'm depriving some bloke of a girlfriend? You know? Very complimentary. But I can't see why it's selfish. I mean, I think the idea that if you reject a relationship, but yet you still demand the rewards of a relationship, if you still demand the security and you demand the affection and you still want people to do things for you, but you're not prepared to commit and give that time back, that's selfish. But if you choose to live the life that you want to lead and you're not making any false promises to anyone, I struggle to see why that's selfish. And then in the next breath, the same sort of people will say, but what about when you're old and you're going to be lonely? And then I think, well, if I'm to find a husband now to ward off the possibility that I might be lonely when I'm 70, someone who just ticks a few boxes, isn't that selfish? Isn't that a bit like a life insurance policy? And who know, you know, who's to say that that person that you meet may not get ill or may not die or you may not be happy anyway. So I think there's this real misnomer that what you have to meet someone, you have to devote your life to someone, and if not, you're selfish. And I think this is very characteristic of, I think what this symbolises is just how deeply entrenched what I call the fairy tale is into our lives. You know, we seem to think in our society that this is nirvana. The idea of meeting the one, meeting Mr. Right is the only route through life. And it's assumed that if you haven't met that person yet, if you haven't settled down, then you're still looking for it, or you're a failure in some way. You know, people seem to think of meeting their handsome prince or handsome princess as the panacea to all life's ills. So you hear people saying things like, oh, you know, she's gone through such a bad time lately. She lost her job, then she was ill. She just really needs to meet someone nice. And it's as if that will just make everything, you know, okay. Or they'll say of a man, oh, he's such a nice guy, he just needs to meet a good woman. As though everything in life will slot into place as soon as we meet people. You know, we hear phrases like settling down. as if that implies that any life that we had before we got married or before we meet that partner is insignificant. It's somehow juvenile, and our real life, grown-up life, starts after we get married. And I think that's quite insulting to all the achievements and our lifestyles that we've had before we settle down. So and the other thing is that once we do meet someone, then it's assumed that we must prioritize our life in order to keep that relationship and in order to make it thrive. So it's assumed that your relationship must come above everything. I had someone that I interviewed in my book was telling me that he had a fantastic job opportunity to go to New York, and he was with a serious girlfriend at the time, and he really wanted this job, but all his friends, all his family said to him, no, but you can't put your job first. You have to put her first. And I find it quite hard to comprehend that we, as a society, it's really frowned upon to admit that you put your career first, or to admit that you put a hobby first. Or I remember when I was last in a serious relationship, and I have had them. I'm not totally against them, and it wasn't that long ago. I remember going on, a friend was getting married in Hawaii. Brilliant party, 2 weeks in Hawaii, it was fantastic. I was invited and he wasn't. So I blew all my holiday budget, both time and money, on this holiday in Hawaii. And then, of course, a few months later, the boyfriend wants to go for 2 weeks in Mallorca. And I'm like, sorry, I can't afford it because I've been to Hawaii. And that's, people can't, and people think that that's terrible because I prioritize with my friend instead of a relationship. And I think this is the problem with love, and romance is fantastic and we should celebrate it. And I love it. And I have many lovers who I feel, and have had many lovers who I feel great affection for and great respect for. But what turns me off, and a lot of the people what I found when I was interviewing this book, is it's the notion that a relationship has to be so all-encompassing. It's like you have to sacrifice some part of your life in order to have the conventional modern relationship. So the reason why I wrote this book is because I wanted to look at what the alternatives are. It's not because I'm saying don't get married, don't fall in love. Of course not. That's part of the human condition, and it's a fabulous thing, and I hope everyone in this room does fall in love or is in love, and I hope I can fall in love. But there must be a way in the modern world where we promote individualism so much, and where we're raised to be independent. There must be another way of doing it without feeling that we sacrifice part of ourselves. And I wanted to explore much more appropriate modern models of relationships. So what I wanted to look at is the idea, is marriage really the Holy Grail? Is it what actually is best for our welfare? Or do we just think it is because society has led us to believe that it is? And I interviewed several divorcees for this book, and many of them said things like, I just sleepwalked into marriage. I met a girl, she ticked a load of boxes, she was sane, she was pretty, I was of an age where I thought I got married, and they expressed not really thinking about whether they wanted it, but just thought they are of a certain age, this is what they should do, feeling like they sleepwalked into it. But then once they were there, they expressed that they lost a sense of their identity, lost a sense of their self. One man said to me that he looked in the mirror one day and he said, what happened to that young, ambitious man who was alive and saw the party? Now my whole life has become about following the agenda that my wife has set. And I think there's a lot of this, and not in every relationship, but I think there is a lot of clouding over of identities that go with the conventional marriage. So when I talk about the fairy tale and the conventional man, what is it exactly? And it is what I think it's society's expectation of the conventional relationship. And I define that by four things. First of all, it's expected to be lifelong. When you meet the so-called the one or Mr. Right, we think that's it. This is going to be one person. We have to shut off our sexual desires and our romantic longings now for the rest of life. One person is expected to meet all our needs forevermore. Now, I'm not here to give a talk about divorce figures, because that can be a whole talk on that in itself, but the latest figures from the Office of National Statistics state that 42% of marriages now end in divorce. So I think that gives some indication that perhaps we shouldn't be setting our expectations for a fulfilling relationship as lifelong. You can still have a very fulfilling and rewarding and loving relationship without it necessarily having to be lifelong. And now a third of babies born today are expected to live to 100. So if you put that into some sort of perspective, in 1850, the average marriage lasted 25 years. By 1950, the average marriage lasted 45 years. Today, with life expectancies increasing to be 100, we can expect to stay with a partner for 45 years after the children leave home, which is great if you're happy with a partner. But it does make the expectation for a lifelong marriage much more radical than it's ever been. Secondly, the fairy tale expects us to make a relationship full-time. We're expected to socialize and operate as one entity. So once you're in a couple, you're expected to go to social functions together, to go to weddings together. If someone were to turn up to a wedding and their partner wasn't with them, I'm sure there'd be lots of raised eyebrows. And thirdly, it's expected to be cohabiting. Now, this seems to be the ultimate stamp of approval for a relationship. When I was last in a serious relationship, and what I define as serious is someone that I was in love with, that I decided I only wanted to be with this person, and someone that I thought I wanted to be with for a long time. So not like my normal, more ephemeral encounters. And I really did consider this a serious relationship. So people would say to me, they were delighted because finally the girl who has been single for years and years had finally considered herself in a serious relationship. And everyone I met, from my hairdresser, from my friends, my family, would say to me, "Is it serious then?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And they'd say, "So are you going to live with each other then?" And I'd think, no, no, just because it's serious. I have a beautiful flat, he has a beautiful home, my flat's well suited to where I work and where I live and where my friends are, what my hobbies are, and ditto for his house. Why on earth would we need to uproot all that so that we can share a wardrobe, set an alarm clock at the same time, and we don't have to get up, share wardrobe space? No. But it doesn't mean that I didn't wholeheartedly love that person and could wholeheartedly give to that person. And I think there is, the idea that in order for a relationship to get the stamp of approval in society, it has to be cohabiting. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how modern society has facilitated us to live apart a little later. And fourthly, the fairy tale relationship is expected to be monogamous without question. Most couples get together and they don't even have a conversation about whether they're expected to be monogamous. It is de facto, it's expected. And again, I'm not here to talk about whether monogamy is natural or not, because that would be a debate all unto itself. But suffice to say that in every culture, in every era around the world, there are numerous sightings of adultery. Even in countries like Iran, where adultery is punishable by someone being stoned to death, and people are still cheat. So I think that what that tells us is just how difficult monogamy is and how perhaps it's not so natural. Now, I'm not saying that the answer to all relationships is that we have an open relationship, but I do think we need to be aware and we need to be open that love and fulfilling love doesn't necessarily have to be all of these four things. So that's what the fairy tale relationship is. Why do we all believe in the fairy tale? Why do we all think that this is what we have to do in order to reach happiness, contentment? Now, I talk in my book about something that a societal force, which I call Love Inc. And I call it Love Inc. Because it can be compared to a very powerful corporate force that uses a marketing technique to shape how we think and get us to buy into a particular way of thinking and gets us to buy into a brand.